Welcome to Finding Faith, the space we come to share stories of encounter, ask questions, and share in the lived experience of others. As you listen to the stories of our interview guests, I ask that you consider the courage it takes to stand before your peers and share your experience of faith for the benefit of another. My name is Jessie Bennett, and this is the 34th episode of Finding Faith. So today we have with us Hunter LeBlanc. Hunter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Hunter. I am the son of Jeff and Lindy LeBlanc. I have one older sister. I am from Hickman County, Kentucky. I just graduated from Western Kentucky University with a degree in history. I am going to be entering seminary at St. Meinrad in the fall with the Diocese of Owensboro. I play piano, and I like to read.
Thank you. And Hunter is going to share with us about how he has encountered Jesus in his life. So Hunter, why don't you tell us your story?
Well, my family is Catholic, so I was baptized as a baby, raised in the church, cradle Catholic. But my family wasn't very practicing growing up. Pretty nominal home church. At the later part of my childhood, we kind of just stopped going to mass, so at a certain point, pretty much no home church. But blessing that I've had throughout my life is that my parents did send me to Gasper River Catholic Youth Camp, and that definitely gave me a tie to my Catholic faith throughout my childhood. And it was definitely very instrumental in instilling a Catholic identity as I got older. Later, when I got confirmed, is really when, that Catholic identity got really instilled in me. And around that time, I started really wrestling with a lot of questions about God, about the existence of God, about the reliability of the Bible, the role of the church in my life and in today's society. Just really struggling with those things and wondering what the truth was. And Gasper River was very, again, instrumental in helping me with that, helping me through that, connecting me with resources to feel like I was finding the answers on my own. So I'm really thankful for them. So ever since my confirmation, I've seen that God has really given me this gift of a passion for the truth, of wanting to stand up for the truth and seeing that truth in the Catholic Church. I've really been passionate about apologetics since that time, and that's never something that really went away. And it's really helped me to at least relate to God on an intellectual level, but it's also definitely given me an avenue to enter into a deeper personal relationship with God. Throughout my years in high school, my relationship with God was somewhat superficial, or at least that's how I see it. It was definitely very intellectual and wanting to know more about God, but not much of knowing God personally. But that changed a lot when I left high school. I went to WKU to study history, and when I came there, I found a really awesome Catholic community at the Newman Center, and they were definitely a big inspiration to me. I had never really grown up with a lot of Catholic youth outside of Gasper, and seeing these college-age people really passionate about their faith was something very, I guess, kind of new to me, seeing it outside of Gasper. And I just saw a lot of beauty in the way they were living, that they had this kind of personal, I guess, relationship with God, that they had lives of prayer. They had dedication to the sacraments. They had great love for each other. They were just really joyful. And that made me really want to live like them, to, seek out whatever they had. And, the community at the Newman Center, their friendship helped me to enter into that relationship more and just have a model for what that looked like. I think throughout high school, I had thought that I was like living out the faith really well, which I'm sure in a lot of ways I was, but I just wasn't. I don't think I was like completely aware even of the fact that I didn't have a personal relationship with God, or at least a somewhat cursory one. So yeah, after coming into that Newman Center community and growing in friendship with these people, they definitely helped me to grow in relationship with God, to start building up somewhat of a life of prayer. Something also that was really influential was my first year of college. I went to this Catholic conference called Seek, and it was put on by Focus, which is the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. It's this missionary program. And it was definitely a big catalyst in my faith, just like helping me to see more and more what the possibilities are when you invite God into your life, and just like every avenue. And when you put God at the center of your life and, let him become the center of every part of your life. And when you start making your life for God. That next summer was also very influential. That was the first time that I had ever worked on Gasper River staff, full-time summer staff. And, ever since I was a little kid, I knew like, okay, one day I want to be a Gasper River staff. That was like the dream. Cause I just thought the staff was so cool growing up. And then when I did it, I knew it was going to be a really fun summer, but I didn't know, I had no expectation for how God was going to, or how I was going to encounter God that summer. And two big things. One is just, I feel like I did have a really real encounter with God. Like we had prayer with the kids every week, and I really encountered God through the kids and through the staff, seeing Christ in them, and, encountering Jesus in the Eucharist. And I think it was also a really humbling experience. Like I said, I had a very intellectual relationship with God in the past. And so I think I really did come into that summer with kind of a know-it-all attitude, thinking like I have so much to offer these people because of my intellect, which, I mean, like God gives us all gifts, and I definitely think I did have things, but it shouldn't have just been that, and there are many opportunities where God came to me in my pride and really showed me a lot of ways that, I don't have all the answers, and I really need to learn from other people too. So I'm really thankful for that. Ben Worrell, the camp director, there's this saying that he always says that everyone knows something about Jesus that you don't. And that's really, I see that as one of the big lessons that I took away from, working that summer. So I was kind of on a spiritual high when I left camp that summer, and I was really ready to dive deeper into my Newman Center community, become more of a leader, and just try and grow in my faith. And for about 2 months, I had a lot. I kind of kept on that high, and prayer felt really natural. I had a really good prayer life. I was working in my Newman Center community, starting to take on more roles in, I had been growing this whole time in my knowledge of apologetics, and so I felt called to take up more roles in this apologist sense. Started leading these apologetics courses at my church. Later on, I started a YouTube channel about apologetics. And for those 2 months, my faith life just felt really good. But after those 2 months, things just kind of took a nosedive in the way that they felt. I felt a lot of spiritual desolation in not really feeling God in my prayer anymore. Prayer became very hard, and I was distracted a lot and didn't really know what to do in my prayer. On top of that, throughout that whole summer and those 2 months, I felt like I had a lot of spiritual success in just like growing in maturity and discipline and virtue. And after those 2 months of like really easy prayer and all of that, I felt like that really stagnated. And it was hard. It was really hard to see God working in my life. And that state really went on until the end of the next semester. So it was a long time, or relatively, of feeling just not close to God. And in some ways, it really caused a lot of shame, because I had become a leader in my Catholic college community, and I was talking to people about the gospel, and a lot of times I felt very inauthentic because I felt like I was telling people that there is freedom. There's a lot of freedom in being Catholic, in having a relationship with God. You can find God's grace in the church, in prayer, in the Eucharist, all these different things. And while I knew that was all like logically true, it wasn't really something that I like felt in my own experience at that time. I think at that time, I very much recognized that there are lots of periods in people's lives and they have like a spiritual high and then they fall off. But I think because I was just in it for so long that I had questioned whether like that encounter with God was really authentic in the first place, or if it was just because I was having a lot of fun at camp and having a lot of fun being a leader in the Newman Center community. So throughout this time, there was a passage in 2 Corinthians that I really related to, where Paul talks about having thorns in his flesh, or messengers from Satan that harass him. He said that Jesus told him that his grace was sufficient for him with those thorns. I felt like I had a lot of like thorns in my flesh, just with my own weakness. And again, like I felt like I was stagnating in that growth in virtue and discipline. And in fact, even kind of backsliding. And Paul is talking here about how God's grace is sufficient for him in that. And I really wanted to believe that God's grace could be sufficient for me. But again, my own experience was just telling me that God wasn't giving me his grace or something. And so at the end of my second semester of my second year of college, in 2020, I felt really far from God. I felt like I had kind of drifted, and I felt a lot of anxiety and again, shame, and not really wanting to be involved in the Newman Center community because I felt like I was just not living well. And the pandemic hit, so that gave me a perfect opportunity to not be involved anymore. And I got to just separate myself from everyone and say for a bit, God, I just feel like you have abandoned me. So I'm not even going to make the effort to pray, make the effort to attend online mass or anything. And yeah, it was just a really dark time in my faith. And I was, I believed in the truth, but my experience, I just couldn't reconcile it all. The beginning of the turnaround for me really happened when, like I said, I really like to read. So, and throughout this whole time, I still had a passion for learning new things about apologetics and about theology and philosophy. Maybe at the time I just felt it was more intellectually stimulating than anything, but like I said, I think that God has really, what's the word? God has really helped me to encounter him through that. So there's this one book that I read around the time that Mass opened back up at the end of May in our diocese. It's The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And if you haven't read this book, really short synopsis, it's essentially a bus ride from heaven to hell. So C.S. Lewis puts forth this like picture of the people that you see in hell or the people that you see in heaven. And he puts forth kind of this argument for why people are in hell, why people are in heaven. And he says essentially that those who are in hell are locking themselves in from the inside, that you couldn't drag them out of hell if you wanted to, because they want to be there. The choice of hell is a free choice. And it's really pride is the main thing that drives them there. There's this one quote. He says, "Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven," is like what lies in the heart of people in hell. But the people in heaven are these transformed heavenly creatures, and it's just like this idyllic picture of a human being that they have like reached their full potential of humanity, but then are being transformed like infinitely into the future. So it's pretty crazy. But I think this book really helped me to begin to change my view of what the gospel is about. Because I think throughout the time that I was in that really dark time, not really feeling God, I had thought that it was all because I was doing something wrong. And then over and over again, I thought, okay, I just need to try harder. There must be something that I'm doing wrong that's closing off my heart to God, and that's why I can't feel Him in prayer or in Mass or anything like that. And I think I had reached like a pretty legalistic or like perfectionist view of the gospel, and I don't think what I believe was technically like heretical or anything, but I don't think it was the best picture of God in general. The picture of the gospel that I kind of shifted to or started to shift to because of this book is that God's interest is much more interior than the exterior actions that we do. Like I said, it was pride that drove each of these people to hell. And that's really the thing that, Jesus came to humanity. He became man to conquer our hearts, to break through this pride that was like at the root of humanity's fall from grace. And also this picture of transformation, I think that lies at the center of, our gospel. I've read a lot of C.S. Lewis's work since then. He's very focused on this idea of theosis, something that was very central in the early church, especially among the Greek fathers, that they would say God became man so that man might become God. This idea of divinization, that like we're not just called to become very virtuous, while that's very good. We're not just called to become people who are very disciplined or who are able to try really hard. Like God wants to bring us to the level that we are, in a sense, gods ourselves, that we come so close to God that we are made sharers in His divine life. And if we are to reach that, there's a lot of work that God does to get us there. And the virtue of faith was also something that God really put in front of me. That it was, I had really made the gospel to be a lot about things we do or our spiritual successes. But another book that I read, Interior Freedom by Jacques Philippe, was really helpful in shifting that view. That, his thesis in that book is we grow in freedom in the proportion that we have faith, hope, and love, the theological virtues. And that's something that's can be really scary, but also very beautiful, that the faith, hope, and love that we possess, because they are theological virtues, they come from God, we have absolutely no control over how much of that we have. There's no just like trying harder to have more faith. That would be like trying harder to breathe underwater. It's not something that we're just able to do. It takes the miraculous intervention of God to give us faith, to give us hope, and to give us love. But He opens us up to those things in really beautiful ways. And I think it helped me to reinterpret that whole almost year that I had of feeling like God was apart from me, that He was really helping me to see that I am really nothing on my own. If I don't have God, then I have nothing. And He kind of helped me to be in this spiritual poverty and to desire more, to like truly desire to have a relationship with Jesus, and to hope that He would transform me into a heavenly creature. I was still left in this position of not really knowing what to do. I still didn't feel really close to God. I felt like there was a lot of hope in something happening in the future, but I just didn't know what. And then something really miraculous happened, I think. Went to confession one day, and I was talking to my confessor about some of these things, and he said, "Hunter, it sounds like you're really desiring holiness. So for your penance, I think you should pray to our Mother of Holiness, Mary." And he gave me like 3 Hail Marys to say. So I said my Hail Marys, and it kind of just, this thought came into my head of, I had heard about Marian consecration before. It seemed kind of radical to me. I had looked into it a little bit, but I didn't really understand it. It even kind of seemed superstitious in a sense, and I didn't really know if it was for me. But I was thinking, well, I had been learning a lot about how my previous assumptions were often false, so maybe this is something I just needed to give another try. So I started reading 33 Days of Morning Glory by Father Michael Gately. It's a preparation for Marian consecration. At the same time, I was trying to square away how Mary fit into our lives, into theology. So I read another book called Behold Your Mother by Tim Staples, and it's essentially like a defense of the Marian doctrine, a scriptural defense of the Marian doctrines, and it really helped me to see where Mary is in Scripture. And it really, after I finished that book, I became very convicted that Mary is very central, not only in Scripture, but also in just the gospel in general. And by the time I had finished the Marian consecration, and I did the Marian consecration, I definitely felt I had a very awesome encounter with Jesus and with Mary. Jesus through Mary. That's the point of Marian consecration. And yeah, I became very convicted that she really is the secret weapon of Catholicism. I'm pretty sure that he calls it that in the introduction to that preparation. So for about a month, I had another short period of feeling this consolation in prayer. Prayer was really easy. I was praying the rosary constantly. And it really was a beautiful time of really feeling a close encounter with God. But after about a month, that ended. But this time, I was left with something really steadfast and beautiful. And I think that God really did give me a firm faith. Through his mother, he gave humanity his own mother to show that he is going to continue to be faithful to them. Jesus promised us that he'll be with us until the end of the age. So we know that Jesus will continue to be close to us, but he's also given us this incredible advocate for the church. Yeah, this woman who is so mysteriously united to the Holy Spirit. She's able to attain for us all the graces that we need to become saints. And like I said before, I think her role at the center of the gospel is that because we humans who are so weak and so faithless a lot of the time need to rely on God's grace, and Mary is the most perfect way to come to God's grace. I think St. Louis de Montfort says this Marian consecration is the most perfect way for us human creatures to give ourselves to God, our Creator. This thing that I was left with, beyond just a greater faith in God, in who he is, and hope for what I can obtain from him, was also kind of just a new way to practice Catholicism, and it's the way of true devotion to Jesus through Mary. And I think the best way to look at Marian consecration, at this new way of life, is a slavery of love. That we, people who are so weak, and if you're a person who relates to me in any way, that you just feel so weak and inconstant and unable to, do the things that have the virtue that you want to have, Marian consecration is perfect, because we don't rely on that. And I'm able to just boast in my weakness and say, I'm not able to obtain these things for myself. And every time my weakness shows itself, I'm able to just have a reminder that I can't do this on my own. And instead, I commit to the slavery of love in giving myself to Mary, that I do not own myself. I gave everything to her. And when I get to heaven, that's what I'm going to tell God. I'm going to say, God, I gave everything to my mother. And we believe that for us who are consecrated to Mary, that in heaven we recognize our weakness, and we won't even have any of our own merits there. We're instead going to be clothed with the merits of Mary because we are her children. I think one other thing about how my view of the gospel changed is that I had always thought that if I had real faith in God, if I had an authentic faith in God, then I should I should expect to see this miraculous change in the way I live my life, or more specifically, that prayer should be easier, or that I shouldn't struggle with the things I struggled with anymore, or that I should be able to obtain these virtues that I thought I needed. I want to be clear that most of that didn't really change for me after, I consecrated myself to Mary. It wasn't like prayer just became easy or virtue became easy or any of that. And I still, to this day, like sitting in this chair, Hunter LeBlanc, very much struggles with prayer, and I'm very much not faithful to it a lot of times. Well, I still recognize that virtue and prayer are like oftentimes the key to a growth in relationship with God. The difference is that I just trust that God is going to use that weakness to transform me in a way that I didn't expect. Just like that lesson I took from the Great Divorce, that God is transforming me. He is presently working in my life. I may just not know the way that he is. And instead of, trying to increase my current faithfulness through X, Y, or Z, he may just be trying to conquer my heart more deeply by showing me that I need to rely on him more. And that's given me extremely great hope in God. Yeah, and about 2 Corinthians, since rereading it in this new phase of my life, I see now that Paul was in kind of a similar situation, and I had kind of misinterpreted it the first time. That he was exactly saying that he was not able to get rid of these thorns in his flesh, that he wanted God to take them away, but Jesus told him, no, I'm not going to take them away. When he said, my grace is sufficient for you, he wasn't saying, my grace is sufficient to take these away, which he could have if he wanted to. But he was saying, my grace is sufficient for you to turn you into a saint one day, or to turn you into a saint presently, like I'm presently working in your life. And after that, Paul even said, I'm able to boast in my weakness because of this. So it's not now in spite of my weakness that I believe, but often through my weakness that I believe that God is actively working to make me a saint. And I can tell you with full confidence that through the power of Mary, through the power of Jesus, I will be a saint, but in God's plan and God's time.
Thank you so much, Hunter, for sharing your story with us. If you don't mind, I just have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you.
Absolutely.
So at one point you mentioned that you didn't really understand what it meant to have a relationship with God. And I assume that that has evolved and changed over your encounter experiences of the last couple of years. If you could tell me a little bit more about what you think it means to have a relationship with God.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me, I've always found the creation story and the story of man's fall from grace is really beautiful, and I think kind of insightful into this concept of a relationship with God. That before the fall, Adam and Eve's relationship with God was one of perfect faith, that they had a father, they had a king who was deeply in love with them, ruling over them, but in a loving relationship. And they put all of their faith in him, they put all of their hope in him, and they loved him. But it was the Catechism in its description of man's fall from grace says that it was in that moment, through the temptation of the snake, of the serpent, that faith died, or trust died in man's heart. And I think that's the image, the opposite image of having a relationship with God. That when we get further from God, it's essentially this pride that's working, that we are losing our trust in God and putting more trust in ourselves. So on the flip end of that, I really see having a relationship with God, at least the very beginning of it, is putting our faith back in God, having trust in God. And that Jacques Philippe book, it was called Into Your Freedom, because once we put our faith in God, we find that our faith really is freedom, that no matter what's going on in our lives, no matter what we're struggling with, our external circumstances, or even our own weakness, none of that necessarily has to shake the freedom that we have if we have faith in Jesus. If we put our trust in God and allow that faith to form love, which that love, like love is a verb, has to come out through action. And I think the fruit of faith often is this active love of wanting to commit your life to God and making actions easier, like prayer, like serving others, like decreasing that pride and having a greater humility in recognizing the beauty of life, the beauty of living a life in service to God.
I really like that definition, and this idea of, love being a verb, and we have to place our trust in God, and that, I think you called it active love.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what you said. So what does that, in your faith life, how do you live out that active love and putting your trust in God?
Well, one way is, because I have had this encounter with God, it's really driven me to want to help others to have this same encounter. And like, I know that I don't have the power to convert other people. That's only the power of the Holy Spirit. I believe that God, part of the reason that God has been working in my life in the way that he has is because he wants me. He desires my heart, but also he wants to use me to build up his kingdom. And in recognition of that fact, I really do have a great desire that I feel is born out of love to help others to find this faith, to help others to discover Mary. We actually founded a Marian Society at our Newman Center, the Society of the Immaculata, and it's definitely, in one sense, it's been one of the greatest blessings of my time at college that I've seen people grow tremendously in their relationship with Mary and grow closer to God through that. So that's one way I live that mission of helping others to find faith. And like I said, I will be entering seminary in the fall, and I think most of what has driven me to that is I want to continue living out that mission of helping others find faith. And, just the main way to do that is through friendship with people, through investing in people, trying to live evangelization the way that Jesus did by coming into people's lives. And I'll say that one more aspect to that is that, throughout this whole journey, it has been pretty painful. And I recognize that there are many people who are in a very similar situation, or just in general are bearing great pains, lots of people much greater than mine. I do have a very deep desire to help people to know like the greater purpose in all of that, because if we don't see where that pain is coming from or what the purpose in the pain is, then it just leads us into ruin. I think JP2 said that the greatest tragedy in the world isn't suffering, but wasted suffering. That, God is trying to transform us, and oftentimes we just don't see it. And a lot of times we don't let him transform us because we just want to revolt against the suffering.
It sounds like you experienced a lot of consolation and desolation, this back and forth in your journey. And this feeling of, it sounded like an abandonment of God. I think at one point you said that you felt like he was not going to give you anything, no grace to get through your struggles and what was going on with you. And you couldn't understand why he didn't make himself known to you in a bigger way. Do you think, thinking back on that time, do you think that you were depending on God or yourself to bring you out of that?
I think I definitely was relying on myself. I think it's a little bit complicated, maybe it's not, but I had a pretty clear vision of who I wanted to be. I was still discerning seminary at that time when I had just left Gasper and throughout that year. And I had this vision of a man who didn't struggle with the things that I was struggling with. I had the desire to be a saint, but I very much wanted it to be the kind of saint that I want to be. I don't think I was willing to let God transform me in the ways that he wants to make me into the saint that he wants me to be. And I think I see a lot of purpose in all that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of abandonment, to show me like the sheer necessity of relying on God, of allowing him to work in my life, and sometimes not in the way that I had intended him to. There's this, it might be C.S. Lewis who said this. Sometimes I just think in C.S. Lewis thoughts, and I don't know if they're mine or someone else's or specifically his, but there's this one comparison I think he makes where he says that Christianity is pretty much inviting someone into your house to make repair on like your kitchen sink or something, and they fix your sink and they stay longer and actually start remodeling the whole house, and they actually turn it into a palace. But in the meantime, you're just like, okay, repairman, I asked you to fix the sink. Why are you breaking all this other stuff down? And I think that was what the rebellion inside of me kind of looked like in that time. I felt like God had worked in my life a little bit, but then when other things started happening, I got very agitated, and I wanted to rebel against it.
So it sounds like a lot of self-surrender, or I guess surrendering of the will and uniting yourself to the will of God was necessary for you to come forward from this, which I imagine is where this Marian piece came in. So how would you say your Marian consecration has affected your ability to surrender to the Father's will for your life, in his plan, in his desire to make you a saint?
Probably the greatest thing that Mary said that we know of was, "Let it be done to me according to thy word." When she gave permission to God for him to conceive Jesus in her womb, the incarnation, when God became man, that she was so intimately united in God's action in the salvation of the world. And the beautiful thing is that in that action, she provided like the perfect model for us to follow, in us saying, "Let it be done to me according to thy word." In the Great Divorce, there's this line that kind of summarizes all of salvation in a sense, or I guess you could say how judgment works, that those who go to heaven, or at the time of your judgment, there's just one thing that happens, and that is either you say to God, "Thy will be done," or God says to you, "Thy will be done." And becoming a saint is essentially saying to God, "Thy will be done." And that's what Mary said when she said, "Let it be done to me according to thy word." So that's the model that we follow.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Hunter, for sharing your story with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
And thank you all for listening here today. If you are interested in hearing more stories of finding faith and encountering, tune in next week for our next guest. If you have questions, need someone to journey with, or would be interested in sharing your story, please contact me at findingfaith123@gmail.com.